Coming up on Network Africa, at least 175 people, mostly civilians, killed in 2 days in Sudan bombardments in Darfur and Omdurman. France begins its military withdrawal from Chad. Plus, a new study highlights the R21 malaria vaccine's cost effectiveness in fighting the deadly disease. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Layo Olarinde. We begin in Sudan. At least 175 people have been reported dead and dozens others injured after a series of airstrikes hit Sudan's capital on Monday and Tuesday. The attack has been linked to the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, who have been waging a war with the Sudanese army in the 20-month conflict. Well, the first attack took place on Monday when an airstrike hit a busy market in the town of Kabkabiya, 180 kilometers west of North Darfur, killing at least 100 civilians, including women and children. In a separate incident, at least 65 people were killed in Omdurman, which is an army-controlled region, and according to the Khartoum governor, Ahmed Hamza, who indicates that 100 were injured during the incursion. Well, Tuesday marked the year's most violent clashes between the regular army that's led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and the RSF commanded by his former ally and deputy, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo. Nigeria's Minister for Foreign Affairs, Yusuf Tuga, will be chairing the 53rd meeting of the Mediation and Security Council of the Ecowas Commission that is expected to hold in Abuja. According to a statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the minister will also preside over the 93rd ordinary session of the Ecowas Council of Ministers, scheduled for Thursday 12th and Friday 13th December 2024. Issues that will foster development, peace and security, as well as good governance in the sub-region is expected to dominate discussions. A recently conducted study by One Day Africa has unveiled the cost-effectiveness of the new R21 malaria vaccine. One Day Africa is the African branch of the U.S. public health nonprofit One Day Sooner. The study says this vaccine stands out when compared to existing malaria prevention methods such as insecticide-treated bed nets, seasonal malaria, chemo prevention, and various mosquito control strategies. The study also provides a detailed analysis of two leading malaria vaccines, the R21 and RTS-S, evaluating their cost effectiveness, concluding that these findings suggest that the R21 vaccine could significantly enhance malaria prevention efforts while also addressing affordability issues in low and middle income countries. Back in October, Nigeria received hundreds of thousands of doses of R21 that was procured in partnership with global vaccine group Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and UNICEF. Joining us now for more analysis on this study is Zachariah Kafuko, the One Day Africa Director. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's explore this new R21 malaria vaccine and the way your study says, it stands out when compared to existing malaria prevention methods. How so?
Yeah, so I think you may be aware that there are a number of malaria interventions that are currently available and are being used, which also include what you mentioned in your report, the insecticide-treated bed nets. There's also seasonal malaria chemo prevention. There's also other existing vaccines such as RTS-S, which you mentioned as well. And obviously, there's vector control methods such as larviciding, as well as indoor residual spraying. So these are all methods that are available, that are being used in different countries. Now, what this study was trying to look at, following the introduction and approval as well as pre-qualification of R21, was to try to better understand how this new vaccine stacks up against these existing interventions. And the study did find that actually R21 is as cost effective as one of the most leading tools that are being used, which are the insecticide treated bed nets. So I don't know if I've given an answer to your question, but basically, this is what we are trying to look at. Now, I could give you specifics in terms of what this looks like. So, as an example, larviciding methods or vector control methods, which are larviciding as well as indoor residual spraying, they cost the equivalent about $296. And then for RTSS, there is a cost of about $129. For seasonal malaria care and prevention, it came to about $82. So R21 is at $39, almost the same amount as bed nets, which are $38. So this is basically the argument of the analysis, which shows that the R21 malaria vaccine is indeed cost effective.
Now, apart from the cost effectiveness, how affordable is it now for people in Africa here, especially sub-Saharan Africa, that this disease has killed thousands of people?
Yes, that's a good, I think, question and context you brought, because malaria indeed is one of the leading killers, especially for children below the age of 5 in Africa. Africa accounts for over 95% of the global deaths in malaria, and more than 75% of these deaths are actually in children below the age of 5. Now, with this being said, how much does it actually cost, especially for LMIC countries? So this was also another angle that the analysis took into the cost effectiveness analysis. So by comparison with the other existing malaria vaccine, which is RTSS, the cost per dose for RTSS is about $10.90. Then the cost for R21 is about $3.90. So you can see that there's a huge difference between $3.90 and $10. So in a very straightforward argument, you can, I think, clearly see that the R21 malaria vaccine is, I think, one of the most affordable options for low and middle income countries, majority of which are in Africa. And I think there are other considerations that you would look at, but basically the point being that if you're trying to discuss which of these interventions is affordable, definitely R21 is among the affordable interventions, even when you add other logistical costs that could be associated with the distribution of these vaccines.
Indeed. Now, with this vaccine and vaccines joining the intervention list against malaria, are we now confident of perhaps a reduction in the numbers of deaths, or perhaps a total eradication of malaria in Africa?
That's a good question. So maybe before I respond to it, it's important, I think I mentioned that the analysis was trying, first of all, to show that the R21 vaccine is cost effective, meaning that it's good value for money. But the analysis was not trying to suggest that all other interventions should be thrown away in favor of R21. So why I'm saying this is because one of the studies that had earlier been conducted to try to understand what the actual impact on the burden of disease as well as mortality was for vaccines considered RTSS before R21 was approved. Now, this particular analysis found that the RTSS vaccine reduced mortality, all-cause mortality, by up to 13%. Now, obviously, maybe this sounds like a small number, but if you think of it as the number of children who are being saved, who don't have to die, 13% is definitely a huge number. But coming back to the broader question, the vaccines themselves, R21, the bed nets, the indoor residual spraying, the seasonal malaria chemo prevention, all these have to be used collectively. So the best way to respond to malaria right now is to use all the available tools. Now, one of the other studies that had been conducted by Imperial College in London did allude to the fact that by combining all these interventions, which considered RTSS, bed nets, indoor residual spraying, vector control, and seasonal malaria chemo prevention, by combining all these interventions, the burden of malaria, the transmission of malaria was being reduced by up to 92%. Now, obviously, this is a huge number if you think of the burden that we're currently experiencing on the continent. So if there's consistent use of these interventions, the burden can be reduced by up to 92%. But also, it's important to state that the only way that this burden is reduced like this is if countries all across the continent which have a burden of disease apply these tools. They must use these available tools, which means that there's no country that should be left behind, which is why part of the efforts we've been pushing is to support countries, to work with countries that are planning to roll out these vaccines to their populations. Coming on to the point of potential eradication of malaria, this is obviously the envisioned future. This is the future we would all love to see, but it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of commitment. It's going to take a lot of effort on all the stakeholders that are involved. There are currently, I think, very few countries that are malaria-free. One of them, which was recently added to the list, is Cabo Verde, which is on the western side of the African continent. But the point being that eradication of malaria is possible, and with these available tools that are now becoming more cost-effective, that are more efficacious, the reality is becoming closer as we go by.
All right, then. Thank you so much, Zachariah Kafuko, the One Day Africa Director. Thank you for your time on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Here in Nigeria, the National Human Rights Commission says it receives at least 2 million complaints of human rights violations annually, indicating that Nigerians have become more aware of their rights. This is coming as the Nigerian Bar Association says more than 70% of inmates in police facilities are yet to be charged to court or are awaiting trials. The two organizations made their submissions at separate events organized to mark this year's International Human Rights Day in Abuja.
Legal practitioners in the nation's capital have converged on this hall to mark the International Human Rights Day. The president of the Nigerian Bar Association is concerned about the delay in justice administration and the attitude of police officers.
It is a sad commentary on our national life that today, more than 73% of our prison inmates are made up of persons who are awaiting trial or against whom there is no charge pending in any court. And a number of persons have been in prolonged detention in either police stations, DSS facility, army facility, and some other federal detention facilities.
The keynote speaker interrogates the nexus between human rights, the future and the present, while underscoring the need for political will in the implementation of the Universal Human Rights Treaties.
Our human rights future requires us to really internalize the truth that, if one may paraphrase Fela Anikulapo Kuti, nobody can dash us our human rights, that they are indeed universal. So just as we should not take a cue from the quote-unquote advanced democracies when they give themselves, or those admitted to their club, the right to trample on human rights, nor should we wait to take a cue from them before we pursue and enjoy them.
At a separate event, the National Human Rights Commission holds a sensitization walk to raise awareness on the need to protect the rights of Nigerians. The walk, which started from the Federal Secretariat, terminates at the headquarters of the National Human Rights Commission, with participants displaying messages calling for collaboration to end human rights abuses.
We are struggling, we are fighting to make sure that everybody's right is respected. You see, in a country where no rights are respected, it shows the level of, living standard of the people. The number of complaints we receive every day shows me that more and more awareness have been created. Because we receive well over 2 million complaints a year. That was not the case before.
According to a report by the United States Bureau of Democracy and Human Rights, over 62 cases of arbitrary arrest and torture in Nigeria were documented in 2021 alone. A similar report by the Ministry of Women Affairs also recorded over 24,000 cases of sexual and gender-based abuses in 2023. These reports highlight the urgent need to scale up mechanisms to curb the menace.
We'll take a break now on the program, still to come. South Africa is revving up to host the Formula One event in over 30 years. Please join us again for more details. Welcome back to the program. France flew out the 2 Mirage fighter jets it had stationed in Chad on Tuesday, signaling the beginning of the withdrawal of its military forces from the former French colony in Central Africa. And last month, Chad broke off its defense cooperation agreement with Paris. French military spokesperson Colonel Guillaume Vernet said the pair of Mirage 2000D fighters took off after midday from a French base in the capital, in N'Djamena, after Chadian military forces came to wish them farewell, and were returning to a French Air Force base in Nancy, in eastern France. He adds that the negotiations with Chadian authorities continue on how and when France might withdraw other members of its 1,000-strong force in Chad, and whether all or just some of them will leave. The Ugandan army court on Tuesday further remanded opposition leader Kizza Besigye to prison until next January. Besigye's defense team had requested a short adjournment, but the court-martial head sided with the state, which demanded a long break. Besigye is charged alongside his comrade Obeid Lutale with endangering national security and subversion. The two were kidnapped by Ugandan intelligence forces from Kenya's capital in November, prompting outrage. The pair will return to court for mention of their case on January 7, 2025. Besigye's attorneys have opposed his trial in the Army Tribunal and have refused to apply for bail before it. And a doctor by profession, Besigye is a retired officer of the Ugandan Army. Well, there is an alarming rise in suicides among refugees at the Kyandongo camp in Uganda. According to a UN survey, 41 suicides were recorded between January and October 2024, along with over 130 attempts. The post-traumatic stress disorder, which some suffer, is not helping, especially with the harsh living conditions at the camp. Uganda hosts over 1.7 million refugees, and the country is facing an unprecedented humanitarian challenge. The already stretched local healthcare infrastructure struggles to meet the growing demand for psychological care. While the UNHCR is now making an appeal to governments, the private sector, and international donors to increase funding for mental health programs and to also establish effective systems to be able to identify and support vulnerable individuals.
We have new arrivals who have gone through traumatic experience, and some of them are even experiencing PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and that requires more specific care.
In Kenya, at least 3 people have been arrested by the police as hundreds of people protested a wave of femicide cases in the country. Several hundred people, mostly women, marched in the capital, Nairobi, where they blew whistles and chanted. However, they were repeatedly dispersed by police officers firing tear gas from moving vehicles before regrouping. Researchers say patriarchal views and insufficient legal protections are major factors behind Kenya's high levels of gender-based violence. The police have also faced criticism for their actions during anti-government protests back in June and July, when at least 60 people were killed. The authorities have broadly defended the police response, but say investigators we're looking into specific allegations of misconduct.
The authorities and the government cannot take care of us.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has been condemning the ongoing conflict in Gaza, describing Israel's actions as barbaric and urging an immediate ceasefire. He was speaking during a visit to Algiers, where he emphasized historical parallels between the experiences of South Africa and Algeria under oppression, and reaffirmed both nations' solidarity with the Palestinian cause. And the roar of Formula One engines may soon return to South Africa's Kyalami Grand Prix circuit, north of Johannesburg, as the country pursues hosting an F1 race for the first time since 1993. Africa's biggest racing circuit is making strategic moves to meet the rigorous standards required to host the prestigious motorsport event after a 3-decade hiatus. Kyalami has partnered with Apex Circuit Design, a leading motorsport engineering consultancy, to create a roadmap for obtaining FIA's Grade 1 certification that's necessary to host an F1 Grand Prix.
Being here today is like a dream that has come true, and I do hope that I can continue to participate in this kind of sport until such time that I feel now it's time for me to develop others who had never had the opportunity to participate with people that have been driving for years, people that are coming from overseas to come and be part of this occasion. Before you bring in Formula One, because a lot of people don't have access to TVs. When they watch TV, they watch news. They don't watch Formula One. They don't know that there is this thing called motorsport. There's Formula One. There's endurance series in South Africa. So there needs to be education that motorsport is a sport, and it's part of sport. Sport in South Africa is soccer, cricket, rugby. This is not regarded as sport. It's something for those that want to ban their cash.
My question is, are we ready for Formula One? I certainly think a minority of our population will say yes. I'm not sure the majority of the population understands motorsport. So, are we ready? I don't think we are. Is the facility ready? They're very close to it. We've got to lower the barrier of entry to the sport. And the problem with the sport is that it needs an ecosystem. It doesn't need a person. And to get the ecosystem right, we've got to create footfall. Why do you create footfall? Because once you create footfall, corporate South Africa sits up and pays attention. When corporate pays attention, they invest. When they invest, they reduce the cost. When you reduce the cost, you increase the footfall.
And that's it on the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde.